All right, guys, welcome back to RTW's Wild History Ride. I'm Thomas.
I'm Will.
And I'm Rhonda.
And on today's episode, we're going to be delving a little bit into the weird. We're going to be talking about the Salem witch trials. But first, I want to ask you guys to share our podcast with people. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your neighbors. Do what Will used to do to me whenever he wanted me to hear a podcast. He would drive us wherever we were going, and I'd be a hostage. He'd control the radio. He'd turn on whatever his favorite podcast was and make me listen to it.
I haven't done that in a while.
You haven't in a while, but that's because
Listen, it goes back and forth. He has shows that he shows me. I show him podcasts.
It's fine.
It goes back and forth.
But seriously, take your friends hostage and play some podcasts.
Actually, as I recall, I was a captive audience on one of those trips, and that's where I found out about Crime Junkies.
And look, and she loves it.
And it worked out.
I do.
So, with that being said, please share, and let's get into the episode.
Okay, so you're passing that over to me.
Yes, I am.
Okay, Salem witch trials, and I'm sure everybody has heard of the Salem witch trials. Now, for some reason, I was thinking they went on for a much more longer period, and there were more people killed.
It was only a few months, right?
Yeah, it was actually almost a year, not quite. And they actually ended in September of 1692, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, look, just to back up, the Salem witch trials took place from June 1692 through May 1693.
That's it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I think everybody thinks that it was much longer than that, but no, it wasn't.
I did.
Okay, so these occurred in Salem Village, which is now the town of Danvers, Massachusetts. Some of the sites associated with the trials occurred in Danvers. Salem Town, which is now Salem, is where the trials actually took place, as well as the hangings and the pressing of Giles Corey. And we can get into the pressing of Giles Corey here in just a bit.
The pressing.
I remember that whenever we had to reenact the Crucible.
You were him.
I was Giles Corey, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Ugh.
Rest in peace, Giles. Where's the light flicker when we need it?
Okay, so while the hunt for the witches began in Salem Village, during the course of the trial, residents from, and hopefully I'll pronounce this correctly, Amesbury, Andover, Salisbury, Topsfield, Ipswich, and Gloucester were brought in to Salem for trial. Now, this all started in January of 1692, when the daughter and the niece of the Reverend Samuel Paris of Salem Village became ill. Now, by February, 9 girls had become ill, and all were experiencing the same symptoms. They were having fits, and I'm doing air quotes, fits. They were in pain. They were having fever, and they weren't getting any better. So Reverend Paris called in Dr. William Griggs just to see if he could find out what in the world was going on, why the girls weren't improving.
Why are these girls acting foolish?
All the wild craziness going on.
Barking. I believe they were barking. They were hiding under furniture. Like I said, fits, air quotes.
Well, I've already got the answer to that.
You know,
I already know why. It's because they were in an extremely conservative religious community. They weren't allowed to have fun. Literally, all they were allowed to do was work. That was all the fun they were allowed to have in that community. So it finally got to the point where these kids saw an opportunity and they just went crazy. It's like cabin fever. It's what they had. They just went nuts because they had all this built up energy and youthful
exuberance.
Anarchy.
Oh,
by that point it was just straight up anarchy that they needed to let out. And so they were just behaving crazy.
Or you could say, what is it like? Oh, the girls are suffering. What did Marjorie say in that one? Oh, porridge plague. I'm like that.
Porridge plague.
What is porridge plague? I have never heard of that.
Yeah, well, okay, you kind of jumped a little ahead of me on this because I was going to discuss the possible reasons at the end of the story. But we can touch base with that whenever I get to that point. So obviously, the doctor couldn't find anything wrong, and he diagnosed possible bewitchment. So there you go. The horses are out of the barn.
That's what my patients have. Oh, okay.
That makes sense with some of the stories you told me.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so about this time, 2 of the girls named Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and a slave, Tituba, as the women who were tormenting them. And by tormenting, the girls were saying they were being pinched, their hair was being pulled, that they could see these women. So they were being tormented by the women. And when Tituba was questioned, she confessed that she, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne had been approached by Satan and had agreed to do his bidding as witches. Now,
Tituba, why are you lying like that?
I don't know why. But anyway, her confession silenced the opposition. Anybody who believed that the girls weren't seeing what they're seeing or feeling what they were feeling, they were kind of looked at as, okay, so you must be a part of this. And so that kind of silenced everybody who was opposing this.
Now, Tituba was hung too, correct?
I don't think she was. I think she was arrested,
that's
but she
why
was
then.
not hung.
That's the answer. She was probably given an option. Hey, plead guilty, and we'll be lenient with you.
Yeah.
You know, that's probably right.
That's
She
probably right.
It was probably a plea bargain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. You plead to the lesser sentence. If you're accused of being a Satanist or a witch, and you deny it, and they kill you, okay, the better option is to just say, yes, I am. I repent.
Justice for Tituba. That's what I'm going to say.
Well,
But anyway, her confession triggered a hunt for more witches in Salem. So March of 1692, 4 more women were accused and arrested, including Rebecca Nurse. And Rebecca Nurse was pretty important here because the women who had been accused prior to this were kind of on the fringes of society. They weren't exactly well-to-do. They weren't well respected, but she was. Rebecca Nurse was. She was very well respected. And actually, many members of the community signed a petition asking that she be released. Now, her initial verdict had been not guilty. But when the afflicted girls had heard the verdict, they started having fits, air quotes again, in the courtroom. And so the Judge Stoughton, asked the jury to reconsider.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. We can't handle this. So, go back and rethink this.
Double jeopardy.
Yeah. So a week later, she's found guilty and she's hung July 19th of 1692.
Oh, man. I would fight all of them girls outside that courthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, there would be war.
Well, and one of the reasons so many people were accused and so many people were hung, and I say so many, there was a total of 20 that died in this. During this time, the court actually allowed what's called spectral evidence, or evidence based on dreams, visions, or the accused seeing invisible shapes, or the accused taking invisible shapes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was admitted by the court.
And
Now-
you know what's so unreliable about the dream thing?
What?
Well, once you start having this in your daily life, so if you're seriously going through all these trials, everybody's going to be so on edge and afraid of witchcraft that they're going to be having nightmares about it every night.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can
So if
imagine.
they start having nightmares about their neighbors doing witchcraft, that's admissible in court as evidence.
Gosh, could you imagine being
So,
a fly on the wall then?
so think,
Oh, well, what if you were just angry at your neighbor? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Which is
Anything
probably
you say,
what happened.
anything you say works. Well, I'd be stepping ahead of you again. Never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, but one of the community members who didn't believe the girls or the afflicted were telling the truth was John Proctor. Now, of course, he was quickly accused of witchcraft because here again, it's like, well, if you don't believe them, then obviously you're against them. You must be a witch. And so,
Witch.
and like I said, that was the thought. If you didn't believe in it, then you must be part of the whole problem.
Exactly,
And his
exactly.
entire family was accused. I mean, not just John, but his children, his pregnant wife, his
Goody
sister-in-law.
Proctor. Let's see, I remember her.
Goody Proctor.
Goody Proctor.
You've been watching too much TV.
I just remember what was
Crucible.
the Crucible, but what was Winona Ryder's character?
Oh, Abigail.
Yep, and-
Abigail. What was her last name?
Oh my gosh, you would ask me that.
Oh,
I was gonna say Breslin, but I know that's
she was.
not right.
She was like
Williams, Abigail Williams.
She was like the ringleader, at least in the Crucible. I don't know if she was in real life or not, but she was the ringleader.
Yeah, I believe she was the niece, one of the first that
Yeah.
got sick.
Yeah.
She was Reverend Paris's niece.
Now, in the Crucible, it's claimed that John Proctor and her had an affair. I don't know if that's realistic or
I
not.
feel like she was too
yeah.
young in like real life. It's kind
Well,
of
she
like the
was-
Pocahontas thing.
Yes and no, because if she would, well, you said between 14 and 9, so
Yeah, the ages seem to reach go between 9 to 14 as far as these afflicted girls were
I
concerned.
think in a lot of these cases, people were getting married at like 14.
True.
13,
I mean,
14.
shoot, you're a spinster at 14, probably. Then you know,
Life is
on
over.
it.
They would think something's wrong with me.
Oh man, me too. Me too.
Okay, so here we are, the end of September of 1692. Spectral evidence is no longer admissible. So that, in effect, begins the beginning of the end of the Salem witch trials. The last hanging occurred September 22nd of 1692. And hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly. The trials were held by the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which translate to hear and determine. Now, that court was dismissed October 29th of 1692. The 52 remaining accused would be tried in a new court, which was called the Superior Court of Judicature.
Ooh, that sounds
Judicature.
cool.
So no spectral evidence was allowed, so most were found not guilty or they were released due to lack of evidence. Those that were found guilty were pardoned by Governor Phipps, with the last prisoners released May of 1693. Now, during this time, more than 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft, and 20 were killed. Now, 19 were hung, 1 in June, 3 in July. 5 in July, 5 in August, and 8 in September. Oh, wow. And then we had one person tortured to death in September of 1692, and that was Giles Corey. And their method of torture, basically, if you didn't confess to being a witch.
Let me get to this one because I have to reenact this.
Go for it.
They will put a board on your chest. They'll have you basically handcuffed to where you're spread eagle on the ground on your back, and they put a board on top of you. And they continuously stack rocks on top of that board so that the weight's pressing down on your lungs and it gets harder and harder to breathe. And they keep adding more and more. The weight becomes incredibly painful. It's unbearable. You can't draw in a breath. And that's what killed Giles Corey because he was a fairly elderly man whenever he was being tortured.
He was, but do you know how long it took for him to be killed?
3 days, right?
Exactly, 3 days.
Oh my God.
So that went on for 3 days.
Yes. So, but it was like it wasn't like every few minutes they'd add a rock. It was like a decent period of time they'd add a rock, question him, let him sit there with the weight, all this stuff. It wasn't like it was not a slow process.
Well,
not a fast process.
Yeah, you're dead if you don't, and you're dead if you do. It doesn't matter.
Well, now this comes back to what Thomas was saying about Tituba. I mean, she may have said, yeah, I confess right off the bat, just so she wouldn't have to suffer anything like this.
Yeah, she was smarter than them. Whereas all these other people were just being bullheaded because they didn't want to admit something that wasn't true.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, I don't know which side I'd be on, honestly.
But I mean, the thing is, though.
I don't know if I'd want to go down with truth and righteousness on my back or just say, yeah, I did it.
But the thing is, though, you got to admit, like, if you say, yeah, I was, and then they spare you, you're never going to have a job again. You're never going to be able to do
No. They
again.
believe in repentance.
Oh,
well,
whatever. They
now,
say that. They're fake.
I don't know about that because I need to go back and look of the 19 that were hung. I mean, some of these may have actually confessed. I'm not really sure, and then were hung. I mean, that could be possible. We're making the assumption that no one confessed, and all of these people went and were hung saying on the gallows, I'm innocent, don't know why you're doing this. So I can't say that's 100%. Who knows? Some of these people may have confessed. I would be surprised, but why would you confess and then let them hang you?
Well, my thing is like, so how big was this? How big was the village, I guess, that we're talking about?
Oh,
decent
size.
Yeah, I don't really know the size. I don't know the population.
I think they could all fit in a church.
Like, I wanted to say, like, how much, so they could all fit, like, everybody, like, in one church
I believe so. Everybody, but I guess maybe not the kids.
So you have 200 people over the course of the time being said that they're witches, basically?
Well, now remember, I said this leaked out into other areas.
True, right,
so,
other communities.
You're right. Okay, so that makes me feel better. I'm like, golly, that's like half the population or something like that.
Yeah, that's quite a few people.
Well, and just real quick, one of the stories I had read were there was a woman on her deathbed in Andover. Doctors could not determine why she was dying, why she was sick. And so the reverend of that area, the preacher, whatever you will, had gotten 2 of the afflicted girls, air quotes again, to come in to see if they could determine what was wrong with her. And of course, they saw specters around her with some specter at the head of the bed and then one sitting on her chest. And he took them from sick room to sick room to sick room, like 4 different visits of women who were ill, and they saw specters in each case and didn't know any of the women in that town, Andover again, and couldn't name the witches. But they eventually named like 67 once all the women of the village were brought together, and they did what was called the touch test, which I'm not familiar. I don't know what that is exactly, but apparently once they met the women and they could point them out, it was like, oh yeah, she's guilty, she's guilty, she's guilty. So it just really makes you wonder.
I don't know if it was around the same time or if it was the Spanish Inquisition, but I think the touch test was where they would take a pointed object like a needle, and they would poke moles or freckles, and if the woman didn't react to the pain of being poked, it was called a witch's mark.
Oh.
Okay. Gotcha.
I don't listen. All I'm going to tell you is, shoot, me and the witches were, I would have been for sure accused of being a witch back in the day. 100%.
Well, you know what? Not only were 200 people plus accused, and then we had the 20 who were killed, they also killed 2 dogs. that were
dogs.
suspected of practicing witchcraft.
The
which
dogs?
I
What
don't
did the
get
dogs
that.
do?
2 dogs, yeah. So
I wonder what kind of dogs they were.
I don't know, but obviously things got a bit out of hand.
Oh, I know. If they were
I would
dachshunds.
say that's an understatement.
Yes.
Yeah. So to continue on with this, what caused this to happen? There's a number of theories. Epilepsy, encephalitis, Lyme disease, socioeconomic hardships.
Syphilis.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that was mentioned.
That
You're talking-
could.
I'm joking.
That
I'm
could.
joking.
It could.
I'm partially joking because of how extreme they were, but at the same time, you never know. Some of these people not getting their fill of fun, they might be doing things they wouldn't admit to.
You're talking about very young people, but anyway.
No, well, I know some young people that do things they shouldn't do.
All right. Well, continuing on, just ignoring Thomas. Okay. One of the sources I found with the girls had been playing a fortune teller game, and apparently you dropped egg whites into a glass of water, and then you interpret the shape as to, who your future husband might be or what your life might be. And they had done that on one occasion, and they saw the shape of a coffin, so that scared them. My thought, if that's what happened, then they probably were afraid that they would be accused of witchcraft, and so they got ahead of it and started, pointing out other people just to hide the fact that they had been playing this fortune teller game, which in a time of heightened religiousness, I mean, I can only imagine what could have happened to these girls. But I mean, some of these possible diseases, they were all in. I wouldn't say all, but they were in different households. It's not like they all lived together.
Yeah, yeah.
They were all in the same village, sure, but epilepsy, Lyme disease, and why were they all girls around this same age?
Yeah.
My thought process on it was they got caught doing something they shouldn't, so they started making accusations to cover their butts, like you said.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
exactly.
just it. But also, again, I think this is from the Crucible, so I'm not sure how real it is. But there was a scene where these girls, I can't remember if they were doing various substances or drinking or what it was, or if it was just they had been so restrained for so long and the opportunity to cut loose and go wild just took them over. But there was a scene where these girls stripped butt naked and started running around in this field at night because Tetsuba was telling them these stories of her childhood, because I believe she was from Haiti or somewhere like that. And so the theory in what I watched was that they had been seen, and the person had basically told them, keep quiet about it and never do it again. But they got so afraid of it coming out that they accused her of being a witch. And that was what, I believe it was, what's her name, Nurse, or one of the
Rebecca
others.
Nurse,
Yeah.
I believe her name was.
But yeah, so it was stuff like that. They'd rather accuse somebody else than take the blame themselves.
Well, I'm just disappointed that, if those girls that had if they could read or write, I don't know if they could at the time or anything like that. The diaries are like, got up, churned butter. I don't know what they did back in the day. Got up, churned butter. Oh, said Goody Proctor was a witch. LOL, hate her. I'm like, why? Like, why would you do that?
I don't know. Again, the only thing I could think of would be fear, because someone is going to point you out as a possible witch.
True.
Yep.
And but yeah, I some of the other reasons I can't buy that, and that's my thought. Now, another source I found is possible fraud or revenge. Because apparently the feeling is that there were some adults behind this, that once it started rolling, and the adults started taking advantage of it. Yep. Because if you were accused and convicted, then that's right, your estate was confiscated.
Yep.
So it left it up. I assume that someone could purchase your land or your home or whatever, your property, at a lower price than if you had put it on the market to sell, basically.
Yeah.
And that's one of the scenes I do definitely remember from the Crucible. It was what was her name? Anne
Putnam?
Yes. She was the one that accused Giles Quarry of being a witch, and it was her father was pressuring her because he's on the stand saying, you've known me since you were little. You wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
I would never do this to you. And she looks at her father, who's just like giving her this stern look of, say it, kind of thing.
Bless his heart. Bless all their hearts, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't know. We will never know what the real reason was. But what we can say for sure is that it was children doing something they shouldn't have.
Yeah, and to your point, talking about Thomas Putnam, I did read in one of the other sources, and of course he was a clerk of the court, so he, his handwriting would have been on a lot of documents.
Yep.
But supposedly, and I'd have to go back and find the the book of where this was written up, that there was over 100 documents about the trials or in association with the trials that were all done in the same handwriting with some of the same terminology used. And it was in his handwriting, supposedly. So maybe he did have something there, or maybe, like Thomas said, they couldn't write. So maybe he took over writing out their information, taking their statements, whatever.
Which is possible. But
Well,
it is possible.
you always know. I mean, if there's one person that's doing the historical taking or whatever, or writing it down,
they're writing their personal
personal account of it, and no one's really going to be there to test him on it.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, to wrap this up, as I said, this basically ended in May of 1693. And it just kind of just died down when there was no way to prove this with the lack of evidence because of the lack of spectral evidence being allowed in the court. So it kind of died down. Now, the village of Salem suffered a lot as far as these people were so focused on hunting down these witches that they neglected their village, the upkeep of the village, the planting of crops, all of these things. And so it kind of fell on hard times there for a while. And so there were several public apologies that were issued by the local higher-ups in the village, trying to, I guess, get back in God's good graces, if you will.
God don't like ugly.
To try to fix things, repair things, and make their lives back to what it was. And I read this, and I just couldn't believe it. There was actually a published apology by Ann Putnam Jr., one of the chief accusers, in 1706, which basically said, and you'd have to read all of this word for word, but what I saw of this, it basically said, "I'm sorry for what happened, but I'm not really at fault because Satan deceived me." I was just like, so seriously?
It was her, catch me outside.
It was her apology where she didn't admit her guilt.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah, do you think they brought up at Christmas? They're like, God, Abigail, do you remember when we killed that girl? I'm like, that's crazy to me.
Well, it'd be more like, you remember when we killed those 20 people?
Those 20 people?
Yeah, that's like, I hope that guilt is on their conscience for the rest of their lives.
Well, they answered for it, I guarantee it.
Oh, well, we can only hope. And, not only did we kill all those people, but think of all the ones who were, chained up in basements of a courthouse because they were afraid that, believe this or not, that if they didn't chain them in this basement, this area underground, that their spirits would get loose and go torture the girls more. So I cannot imagine how these people suffered for months until they were finally released.
Well, I'm sorry for them.
Yeah. But all right, I believe that's the end of it.
Yeah, that wraps it up. But please go out and research this. This is very interesting. There's been books written about it, some more current information released. As I mentioned, the Thomas Putnam handwriting thing. So very interesting stuff.
And read The Crucible. It's a good book.
Yes, it is.
Very interesting. But all right, with that, again, I reiterate, share with your friends. Don't forget to kidnap your best friend and put him in a car with you and listen to our podcast. Share, and we'll catch y'all next time.
All right, guys.
Until next week.